Welcome to my Pine Cascade transparent watercolor tutorial. This is a narrated step-by-step tutorial which follows the development of this painting at normal speed. This is the companion video to my Pine Cascade transparent watercolor demonstration, which is a video set to music at 3x speed to watch the complete evolution of the painting. On the left is the completed painting. On the right is my reference for this painting. You can see that my reference is a value study using pen and ink and marker. In my value study, I have white, light, middle value, and dark value tones. Because my reference is a value study and not a photograph, my color choices are wide open. The palette I use is completely up to me and my imagination. The nice thing about using a sketch instead of a photo for reference is it leaves you free to use your artistic license. You make your decisions using design principles and you work those out up front with your value study. This starts to move you away from recreating a photograph and focus more on creating a painting and a piece of art. For this painting, I've kept my palette very simple. I'm using 3 colors: sap green, royal blue, and pyrrole red. I've also decided that my painting is going to have a cool dominance. I've made the decision that I'm going to do some masking on my painting up front to preserve some of the whites beneath the large fluid washes that I'm going to apply. To do this, I'm using this fine liner masking pen. There's many ways to do this. You can get little squeeze bottles and fill them with fluid yourself, or you can use a little stick that you dip in, but these work quite well. In the areas where I'm going to put this are going to save a little bit of highlight on some of the rocks, some of the tree trunks, and then I'm going to use it quite a bit in the areas to save some of the water, keep the very light lights in the water. You can see I have a fairly simple sketch, and to indicate the trees I just have a linear shape there that indicates that I'm going to put a tree in there as I begin to paint, and I've outlined a few of the rock shapes and some of the large land masses in the foreground and in the background, but there's not a lot of detail in my drawing. The tool I'm using is called a color shaper. It has a rubber tip at one end and a brush at the other. I use the rubber end to spread the masking fluid. It helps stretch it out a little bit and not waste as much. You can use this with one of these fine liners, or you can dip it in the masking fluid itself, or you can just drip it on there with a larger bottle that has a little spout on it. But the color shaper does a good job of spreading it evenly over a larger area. So I've used this masking pen across the entire surface in various areas, and saving highlights in the water, saving some highlights on the rock, and a little bit there on the ridge of the in the foreground. One of the things I like to do to create a little texture, and in this case the spray of the water, is dip toothbrush in some masking fluid and just splatter it a little bit around the rocks where the water might be crashing. Sometimes I'll throw a little bit of this up into tree area. It just gives a little bit of texture when I remove it, some highlights. It creates a little activity. So I'm done applying the masking fluid and it's dried, and you can see here's a simple sketch with some masking, and now I'm ready to begin my painting. I'm going to start by working in the background a little bit. This is a distant landmass, a distant hillside. So I put a cool medium value tone back there. So I'm trying to indicate that there's two hillsides back here. So I've applied these middle values, and then I'm going to take a fine mist spray bottle and I'm going to soften the edges. So this helps creates the sense that they're in the distance, and again it softens the edges. I'm going to continue with a middle value down along the flow of the water, and keep in mind that that area that's the main flow of the water, the waterfall, has the area masked, so it allows me to work with this very fluid wash and still maintain my white shapes. You can do this without masking, just by selective painting and working in negative space. But depending on how much of this I have to do and how fluid I want to be with my washes, there's times when I prefer just to take the masking approach. As I continue my painting process here, I lay down these values. I'll soften edges with a sprayer, I'll blot with a Kleenex to control the moisture, and then I'll dry it thoroughly. And I'll continue this process until I achieve the value scale that I'm after. Remember that your watercolor is going to dry much lighter than when you first apply it wet. I do dry this between layers. You don't want to keep working in the same space wet, keep bringing in darker value and keep working as it's wet. You'll wear the paper out, you'll lose your white. There's a difference between continuing to brush in an area stroke after stroke after stroke in a wet on a wet surface of the paper, and compared to when you dry it, build another layer, dry it, build another layer. It doesn't wear it out, but it keeps it fresh by taking that approach. So it's dried much lighter, and now I'm coming back in and indicating a darker tree line here with again a middle to dark value. And keep in mind, these shapes, of these values, these value patterns, I worked out in my value sketch ahead of time. So I've applied this middle value tone, and now I want to soften the edges, so I'm going to come in with this fine mist spray bottle. I've got some backwashing going on because I put water on an edge that was already dry, but it really doesn't bother me, and it gives a nice effect, and I'm going to incorporate it into my painting. Here I'm applying again another middle value. I've already applied some, but it's dried, and it's dried much lighter. So I'm going to continue to build layers of these tones, these values, until I achieve the level and the scale, the value scale that I'm after. Now I'm going to start to give the indication and the suggestion of some pine trees. And to do this, I'm using a brush that I really like. It's called a Black Gold Quill series. It comes at a very fine point, and it's pretty good for this type of work. Now a lot of people do this with a flat brush, and it works very well, and it's personal preference. This is just how I like to approach it. And after I start to put these shapes in, I'm going to soften them up a little bit and come in with a fine mist spray to soften those edges. And then as the painting progresses, I'll dry this and I'll paint over top and dry and build layers just as I have from the start. And if you remember my color palette, I'm using 3 colors: sap green, pyrrole red, and royal blue. And so far I've used pretty much a mixture of sap green and royal blue, but as I put these pine trees in, I'm warming it up just a tad by working the pyrrole red into the sap green, and it gives just a little bit of a warmer green than just the royal blue and sap green mixture. One of the reasons I chose this painting for the video, and I have a couple other similar, is I think they are good examples to use with a very limited palette, so there's not a lot of complexity with color, and you can focus a bit more on value and achieving value patterns and getting a value scale in place that includes a white, a light, a middle value, and a dark value. You can make a reference tool for yourself by mixing a neutral color and creating a value scale on a piece of watercolor paper, going from 1 to 10, but you don't necessarily have to have each value from 1 to 10. Just put down a light, a middle value, and a dark value, your darkest dark. And then you use this scale as a reference point throughout your painting process, asking yourself, have I really achieved the range of value that I want? Because a lot of times what you'll find is once you've applied what you think is a dark value, after it's dried, you're really left with a middle value. And using a tool like a homemade value scale can put it in perspective for you. So I'm using a fairly small brush right now, and I'm starting to be a little bit more deliberate with where I'm putting my values, and I'm working with a little bit darker value, and I'm keeping some of this in the foreground a little bit warmer than what I've used in the background. And again, using this with sap green, royal blue, and a touch of pyrrole red. A little more brush work here in the water with a darker value, and right over top the areas that I've masked with a masking pen. It keeps that those white shapes nicely without a lot of work. You just go over top with the brush, and it kind of fills in with that flow of the water because it's got that masking fluid there, but protecting parts of the paper. I'm applying this dark value on the side of this waterfall area, and I'm going to use a fine mist sprayer to drag that tone just to the left of that fall and help spread that diffuse that middle value across the surface. I'm coming back again over top of these trees with a darker value after I had applied it before and then used the sprayer to diffuse that. Gives a nice effect, but the values are still very much in the middle value area where I need darker values on these trees. Here I'm getting very specific with some a very dark value, and trying to set some areas back and bring other areas forward. But you start to position these little strokes of dark value besides very light lights or whites, and it really starts to give dimension to the painting. I've lost some of that edge that I had in that distant hill shape. So I'm going to come in with a darker value and touch the edge of that and gradate it a little bit to give that a little bit more of a presence back there. I'm going to apply a dark value on the base of this waterfall, and then I'm going to come in with a fine mist sprayer. I'm going to spray that up, trying to create a little directional flow and give the suggestion of that water spray. I'm going to come in on the other side and do the same thing. Just apply that dark value, give it a little bit of spray of water, and then just leave it. I had put this darker value in here earlier to suggest a tree line, but it really had a very straight line edge to it, and I wanted to give it more of a tree line suggestion, so I'm coming back in with a darker value and giving the suggestion of an irregular edge that would be more representative of a tree line. So I'm applying this value and then coming back with a little bit of water and softening the edge. Now in this case, I'm softening the edge just with a wet brush, not the sprayer, because I want to be a little bit more controlled in what I was doing. As I've been working on this, one of the things I've noticed is these two shapes are too much the same. The same length, they're about the same width, they are both similar rectangles, which really isn't very good design. So because of that, I'm going to come in and I'm going to break that rocky face on the right. I'm going to break it up and take some values, some different tones, and give them more of the suggestion of rocks and a broken up shape that's not equal to the waterfall. So I'm not doing this because I looked at a picture and I said, oh, it doesn't look like the picture. I'm doing it because I'm trying to stick with good design principles, and you want to have variety. You don't want everything looking the same, and having two shapes that are pretty much at the same angle, the same length, the same width, sitting side by side, it just really doesn't make for a good composition. So that's the reason I've come in and I'm applying these values and breaking this shape down so it doesn't look so much like the waterfall. So I've reached a point where I want to remove the masking from the surface of the paper. To do that, I'm using this crepe rubber pickup eraser that you can find at most art or craft stores. They have it by the masking fluid normally, or a lot of them, they have cans of rubber cement, and they have these pickup erasers by the rubber cement. And with the rubber cement removed, I've revealed these white highlight areas that I wanted to preserve underneath the wash. Now that I've really built up my middle values, I've revealed my lights, my whites, I'm going to start to methodically come in with a fine brush and a dark value and start placing these dark valued shapes across the composition. I'll try to apply some of my darkest darks right beside some of these white areas to really have a nice value contrast. And at this point, I'm not using any reference. I have my value study, and I use that really to put in these major shapes, different values, and where to keep my lights and put my middle values and darks. But right now, I'm just having a little bit of fun and working around the composition, placing darks where I feel they're needed to achieve the contrast. They help create depth and interest in various areas. Here I'm going to do a little negative painting to give the suggestion of these tree trunks in the back. So I've got a very dark value I'm putting on top of a middle value, and I'm creating gaps in this overall dark shape that gives a suggestion that there's a tree there. And do the same thing over here. The placement of this darker value up here on this ridge also helps give some depth. It makes it look like things are going back in space there and gives it some more dimension. With this dark tone I'm applying now, I'm suggesting a horizontal surface back here behind the trees. When you're working with a landscape, you want to have somewhere you want to have a strong suggestion of a horizontal plane. It just brings things down to earth and makes for a stronger composition. I'm using this scraper tool to come into those dark shapes that I just put down, just to break them up a little bit and give the indication of some branches or some plant life there. Here I'm using a rigger brush with a dark value, and I'm just coming in and giving the indication of some of these old pine trunks. I think they call them old nags, just placed around the composition. And I try to make them not all look the same. You want to make them different lengths or different levels of completion. Have one higher than the other, one not as long as the other. Alter the position of the little branches coming off of them. And one of the last things I'm going to do is I just wanted to break that white shape up just a little bit, so I'm coming in with just a light wash and using the spray bottle to diffuse the color a little bit, but it breaks that white shape up just a little bit and ties it together. There you have my painting, Pine Cascade. This was a painting done using a value study for reference and painted with a limited palette. My focus for this video has been value contrast, and I've tried to stress throughout this video how important it is to achieve strong value contrast in your painting. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.